Here we have another example of an equation that we would solve using the quadratic formula. So at first glance you may not see that this is going to be an equation that you would have to use the quadratic formula. But when you look at it and you try to think of approaches to solve, the first thing I would look at is I have a 3x on the outside here. There's nothing I can do until I get my x's combined, and so the first thing I would do would be to distribute this 3x. So 3x times x, I would get 3x squared. Then 3x times 2, I would get a plus 6x and equals 4. The next thing to notice is that the quadratic formula only applies if you have your equation in the format of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So that means anything that's on this other side we have to move over here as our constant term on the end. So to move our 4 over, we would subtract 4 from both sides, and you're going to get 3x squared plus 6x minus 4 equals 0, because on this side you get 0. Okay, now we have our equation in the format of 3x squared plus 6x minus 4 equals 0. So here we have A, here we have B, and the thing to notice is C is actually a negative 4. This format you have a plus C. Well, a minus is the same thing as a plus negative. So negative 4 is our C. Plugging into our equation, we get negative B, so negative 6 plus or minus the square root of b squared, well, b was 6, so 6 squared, minus 4 times a was 3, times c is negative 4. All over 2 times a again was 3. We get negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 6 squared. Let's go ahead and square that. We get 36 minus 4 times 3 is a negative 12. Times another negative 4, you get a positive. 12 times 4 is 48. All over 2 times 3, which is 6. Okay, in the next step, we should take what's inside of this radical and go ahead and add that. So you get negative 6 plus or minus the square root. 36 plus 48 is 84. All over 6. And again, we're at this point where we need to simplify this expression, the square root of 84. So to simplify the square root of 84, alright, let's make a factor tree for 84. 84 factors into 2, 2 goes into 8 4 times, goes into 4 2 times. So 2 times 42 is 84. 2 goes into 42. 2 into 42 is 21. Okay, 2 does not divide into 21, so try 3, our next prime number. 3 divides into 21. 3 times 7 is 21. Okay, 2 is prime, 2 is prime, 3 is prime, 7 is prime. So that means our factor tree, we get 2 times 2 times 3 times 7. So the square root of 84, we have a repeated 2 and a 3 times 7. So that means we can pull one of these 2's out front, and the 3 times 7 stays inside because they're not repeated, and 3 times 7 multiplied together, that was 21. So the square root of 84 is the same thing as 2 times the square root of 21. Here we're going to make it negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 84. We're going to rewrite as 2 times the square root of 21 all over 6. Okay, and then we look at anything that we can factor out of the top. Well, they're both divisible by 2, 6 and 2, so let's pull a 2 out front, and you get -6 divided by 2 is a -3. 2 times the square root of 21 divided by 2, this 2 cancels out when you move it out front, so you're left with a square root of 21. And then on the bottom we have a 6. Then I look at this and I say, okay, well 6 is divisible by 2, and cancel this 2 out of the 6 and make it a 3 on the bottom. Then this becomes -3 plus or minus the square root of 21 all over 3. And then if you wanted to separate this into two separate fractions, you could simplify even further by saying, okay, well this is -3 over 3 plus or minus the square root of 21 over 3. Remember, when you're adding fractions, if you have the same denominator, you just add the tops. And so if I had just a -3 plus the square root of 21 all over 3, you can see that that's one fraction that you've added these two fractions together. So if you want to separate fractions, all you have to do is take each part that's on the top and put it over the denominator if there's a plus or a minus in the middle. So the reason why we wanted to separate these two is because I can cancel this 3 top and bottom, and this becomes a -1. And then I still have my plus or minus, and the square root of 21 divided by 3, I can't simplify this any further. I cannot cancel this 3 out of the 21. The 21 is a square root of 21. This is not the number 21. You cannot cancel inside a square root. Square root of 21 is a number that is between 4 and 5. 4 squared is 16, 5 squared is 25. So this is going to be some number that's between 4 and 5. You can't cancel a 3 out of that number. So you just leave it written as a square root of 21 all over 3. And then if you wanted to write this as two separate answers, I would write -1 plus the square root of 21 over 3, comma, -1 minus the square root of 21 all over 3. And that would be how I would enter my answer if I were using my math lab.